Start your morning with insights and drive. It's the business sit down where ideas come alive. From boardrooms to breakthroughs, we cover it all. Of FS Business School, standing tall. Sit down, tune in, let the wisdom flow. Real talk, big moves, and the knowledge to grow. On your way to work, we're paving the way. The business sit down will set a blaze.
In this episode, we shine a light on the often overlooked informal economy and explore how applying basic costing principles can be a game changer for businesses in this sector. Dr. Carla Serfontein, an expert in management and cost accounting, joins us to discuss why costing matters for informal businesses, how it can drive financial sustainability, and the challenges these businesses face in managing their finances without formal structures. We'll also explore how the fourth industrial revolution is influencing financial practices, even in the informal sector. Tune in to learn how small adjustments in costing can lead to big improvements in business growth and long-term success.
Doctor, thank you very much for joining us today. I know you've got a very busy schedule, so we appreciate the fact that you took time out of it. In simple terms, what is the importance of costing in businesses, especially in something like the informal sector?
I think the main thing is that people often do business without realizing exactly what it costs them to do it. So they often go and say, I want to provide a product, and I think the price of the product or the service should be 10 Rand, for example. But if you haven't gone through the costing exercise, you will never realize that maybe the product or the service actually costs you 12 Rand. So in the end, you operate the business and you do all of this work, and you never get to a point where you can actually make a profit. So for me, that is the main thing, is if you don't know how much something costs, you can't do proper decision making.
Why is cost accounting, talking about, you said that they may think it costs something or whatever. How can explaining proper cost accounting to the informal sector help it either grow or maybe flourish a bit more?
I think the main starting point is the difference between financial accounting and cost accounting. Financial accounting is accounting that people are more comfortable with, or that we talk about financial accounting a bit more. That's the typical accounting that they teach you at school. You've got your debits and credits, and you've got your ledgers. But financial accounting is very constrained. There's rules, there's standards. You have to adhere to that. There's a certain format. Cost accounting is not accounting, although the two fits together, and cost accounting feeds what you report on in financial accounting. Cost accounting's primary purpose is to get information to make decisions. So for me, I would encourage anybody, especially the informal sector, to not focus as much on understanding accounting principles like debits and credits, but really going into the cost accounting side of gather as much information about your product or your service that you possibly can. Because if you've got all of the information in front of you, your decision making becomes so much simpler.
What are some of the challenges faced by the informal sector when it comes to cost accounting, and how or what can they do to overcome this specifically?
I think I would like to say, they don't necessarily know. They don't have access to a computer or a very complicated computing system. But I think in the end, it's almost the constraint of it's too complicated or it's too difficult. And I often surprise my students by telling them, you don't realize it, but every single time you step into a shop, you are actually applying costing principles. So to just take the step back and to really tell yourself it is as simple as it sounds. Because if I walk into a grocery store and I say, okay, I've got 200 Rand and I need to buy bread and milk and eggs, I am permanently going into costing mode. Which eggs is better to buy? This cheaper one or the more expensive one? I look at the quality of something. I look at the size of something. And while I am just doing my normal weekly or daily or monthly grocery shopping, I'm applying costing principles.
A bit earlier when we spoke, you said that a lot of people in the informal sector would say, oh, I think this costs this much. How does the lack of costing principles impact their financial sustainability and in the long term?
I think in the long term, if you continuously sell a product for less than it should be sold, you will not make a profit. But the other side of the coin is, if you sell something to the market for more than the consumer can actually get it somewhere else, you will also not sell anything. So you have the price of a product that impacts your profitability, you have the cost of that product, and then you also have what the buyer is willing to pay for the product and the service, if you are into service delivery. And I think to bring all of these three elements together, to say, you know what, there's a price that my consumer is willing to pay, there is a price that I can deliver the goods or the service to make my business profitable, versus there's a cost related to all of this. And all of these three elements should be aligned. So that's why the more information you have, the more information you have on what my buyer is willing to pay, the more information you have on what this product really costs me. And the other part that really comes into play here is that we are often not certain, or we don't know all of the costs involved. For example, the concept of fixed cost. So there's a nice costing term, but a fixed cost simply means that if you deliver a good or a service and you, for example, work from your house and there's a rent component involved, that's a cost that you actually should take into account, which a lot of informal business owners aren't necessarily aware of. So they would just go and say, okay, but the product cost me this. But if you use electricity, there's a cost involved. If you work from an apartment, or you have to pay to use a kitchen, there's a cost involved. And it's sometimes all of those hidden costs that you're not aware of, meaning you underprice your product and then you won't make a profit, or you overprice your product and you can't sell anything.
Let's say there's someone that's in the informal sector that has no formal training, the proverbial person at the tuck shop or the spaza shop, and this person wants to understand cost accounting in the broader sense. What's a simple term or simple advice you can give this person to either understand it or to get more information in a way that they can understand?
I think for me, there's three terms that will always be applicable. I've just explained the term of a fixed cost. So a fixed cost is a cost that, regardless of whether I sell any product, even if my sales is zero, that cost will still be incurred. And those are the costs that we often miss in costing, because especially in the informal sector, if nobody has ever made you aware of it, you won't necessarily know that you need to include that. So those costs are the tricky costs, but you have to take it into account. Then you've got your variable costs. So those are the costs that people are oftentimes more aware of. It's simple to calculate, it's simple to gather information on. It is the price that I pay for a product. It is wages that I pay if somebody assists me. So if you can distinguish between those costs in the delivering of your product or service, I think you are already a ways off. But the third term that I would always like to explain to somebody is the term break even. So break even simply means that the total income that I've gained from my business equals the total cost. And that cost component includes my variable and my fixed cost. So the moment that you can get to a point where you say, all right, what is the minimum number of units I must sell at a certain price? Or if I have a number of units, what is the price that I must sell these units at in order for me to cover all of my costs? If you can get to that point, you immediately are empowered to make proper business decisions in order for yourself to become profitable.
Do you think the informal sector is a bit more let's call it creative with their financial strategies, because they're not as bound by formal costing rules?
That's a difficult question, because my gut feeling is yes. I often talk to a friend of mine that has a salon, and she has no formal training in finance whatsoever. And the moment that she starts strategizing with me, she will tell me, but she made this plan. If somebody pays on a monthly basis, rather than every single time they come in for a treatment, she can make this amount of money. And this is what it actually costs her, or she makes this more, but she loses this. And I'm every single time astounded, because I think my students want to give me an answer that comes from a textbook, or they want to give me an answer that they think I want. But the moment that I speak to this friend of mine, I realize there's so many more options that I would not necessarily even consider, because I also think, but there must be a rule, or there's a certain pattern, and it's not. So I think to stifle somebody that has a natural entrepreneurial instinct is a risk that we have, oftentimes over-educating somebody. I think one of the main characteristics or skill sets we will have to teach anybody going into all of our industrial development, the fourth industrial revolution, all of those things, is to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And part of that is to be very creative in strategizing sales and costs, and specifically the pricing of your products.
Now, Doc, your area of expertise is costing in the broad sense, but that falls under accounting. So
Yes.
my next question would be, let's say accounting was a superhero. What would the superpower be, and then what would be the proverbial kryptonite of this specific superhero?
That's a difficult one, because we often think like to be able to fly or super strength. I would say to be very wise, to have this super wisdom or insight. You can just look at something and you know exactly what to do, because accounting, and specifically cost accounting, is so much more than just book knowledge. It really entails you to look at something differently. So I would say super wisdom, and I don't think my financial accounting colleagues would like this, but I think to have strict boundaries will stifle that wisdom to say, you know what, it has to be this or it has to be that. But that seems like a very nerdy answer.
In if let's say in cost accounting, if you could add a rule that everyone needs to follow, what would that rule be?
Like a costing rule or an accounting rule?
Any rule but it needs to be related to cost accounting. So if you could add in a rule, like in corporate governance, you get the King reports, for example. So there's certain principles. If you could add something that is a fixed rule that you need to follow in cost accounting, what would that rule you'll add be?
I don't think it's a new rule. I think it's just a rule that I would love everybody to apply. And this is something that throughout my further studies was highlighted to be by my supervisor, but to remember different costs for different purposes. Do not get stuck in, but I always do this with the cost for element X, or I always do this, but to realize that your first question always is, for what purpose am I calculating a cost? And if it's for decision making or for pricing, the way in which you classify your costs are different. So that rule to me is so critical. And I mean, that's a rule I've actually learned only when I started with my master's, which means, I mean, that was after pulling through university, after doing articles, everything. So different costs for different purposes.
Now, one of my last questions would be, as I've said, your specialization is cost accounting. Now, what is something that you, who is cost accounting savvy, have splurged on that is not a cost accounting savvy decision, but just because it's nice?
I love clothes. So I think that I would stop eating and still buy some new clothes. And oftentimes there's still clothes that still has labels on. So that to me is my big splurge. And I feel guilty every single time, because I know I don't need it. I know it's splurging yours. So definitely clothing.
Do you think something like cost accounting, especially if you look at the informal sector now, the majority of people that go into the informal sector, as we know, some of them didn't finish school, or they drop out of school or just finish after matric. Do you think a subject like cost accounting should be a mandatory or a subject that's placed more emphasis on during school to help someone that goes into the informal sector to possibly understand it?
Yes, I've actually done some training in the informal sector, even when I was not at university or working at Koffsies yet. And I think maybe more a combination of financial accounting and cost accounting will be more valuable, because oftentimes we go, if you look at the school syllabus, it is financial accounting focused, and then students almost get discouraged because you have your entrepreneurs that's sitting there that asks the question of, but I want to know more. I don't just want to prepare an income sheet or statement of comprehensive income or a statement of financial position. I'm not necessarily interested in a bank reconciliation. I want to know how to make proper decisions. So I will never throw financial accounting out of the door, because it feels to me that gives you a basis of why. But I would love to see more costing principles incorporated, because costing is more creative. It is more, the boundaries are wider. So there's a lot more that you can actually do, specifically moving towards decision making.
Now, my very last question comes into, what is the industry or company you've seen that is the most cost accounting savvy?
That's the most cost accounting savvy. I honestly don't know, because it's not necessarily industry related. It's often within an industry you have a cost leader, but oftentimes a company will be a leader in how they calculate their overheads, but they still sit with a lot of expenditure that is not necessarily moving them towards being efficient. So I don't think there's one single company. I might be able to mention a lot that's inefficient, but I think it's such a broad space that companies often spend a lot to implement a system like activity-based costing, which is a highly complicated system of overhead allocation. But then they lack on the basic principles of, you know what, am I really utilizing all of my human resources effectively? So it's very seldom that a company really gets to a point that in all aspects they are truly cost efficient.
Thank you very much for your time, Doc. I appreciate it a lot. I know you guys are, unfortunately, I know all the academics are busy, but I appreciate that you took time. Hopefully we'll have you on the red chair again in the future, or maybe it'll be a grey chair at that stage. And then hopefully we can have another conversation on another topic of cost accounting.
Cost accounting. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Start your morning with insights and drive. It's the business sit down where ideas come alive.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, share this with friends and family, and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
Business school, standing tall. Sit down, tune in, let the wisdom flow. Real talk, big moves, and the knowledge to grow. On your way to work, we're paving the way. The business sit down will set a blaze.